Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'll be your host tonight. I am the Assistant Director of NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness North Carolina. And I'm so glad to see y'all. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building community and building conversations around the topic of mental health. It's where we can tell our stories and keep it real. Nationwide, the risk of suicide among police is 54% higher than for any other industry. The stress of being in law enforcement is notoriously high. Officers are exposed to trauma, unrelenting pressure, and this leads to high rates of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress. And even without the work concerns, mental illness hits law enforcement circles just like everywhere else. Right? It doesn't discriminate. We know that about mental health conditions. So what happens when a police officer with a mental health challenge seeks help? When they ask their chief or their command staff, it doesn't necessarily go well. It's a tough situation. We'll be hearing from someone who knows firsthand. Sadie McDonald is a native of Charleston, West Virginia. She earned a bachelor's degree in Justice and Policy Studies from Guilford College, followed by a career in law enforcement that's 22 years and counting. She currently works for the police department for a mid-sized city in North Carolina. It's somewhere under 500,000 people. She summarized her heritage this way. I love this. I am a biracial woman who typically identifies as being a Black woman. I was adopted by a white family of which my father practices law and my mother was a therapist. So you could say I know how to argue my feelings. I just love that line. Sadie will be joining us and sharing her story in just a moment. As usual, the first part of the show will be an interview with our guest. Partway through, we'll show a video of the week, and then we'll take questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience, live and on Facebook. Now we're going to pause for a quick word from our sponsors. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. As always, we appreciate their guidance and their supports. Now, without any further ado, welcome, Sadie.
Hi.
Yeah. I'm doing pretty darn well. Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. And we always love to know the background of our guests. So maybe you can tell us about yourself in a nutshell.
You shared a little bit, but just a little bit more about me is I'm adopted. I'm a biracial female. My birth mother was white, Black, and my birth father was white. On my birth mother's side of the family, I am one of 12 children. In my adoptive family, I'm one of 5 children. So I came from large families. Let's see here. I am a police officer, and I was really drawn to becoming a police officer because of the Rodney King beatings. And I remember being in school and having lots of debates with fellow students. I had good contact with police officers as a young person through the DARE program and things of that nature, and not seeing the other side of policing. But I didn't know how I could get into the field and affect some change, except for becoming a police officer myself and representing the culture, my culture and my background in this field.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So it was a social justice motivation from the start for you, or at least in part.
Yeah, because I mean, again, like I said, I've just had so many debates about, police brutality and what police were doing, because I had a completely different view of them and what they were doing for the community. And I wanted to further that view, that it could be a good thing, not to mention, if you don't, it's just like your government representation, if we don't have people that look like you, believe in what you believe in, live life like you do, they're not going to be able to represent you. And so the same thing is true for the policing. If you don't have somebody to represent you, I think that it takes away from the organization it's serving.
Absolutely. So when you say you had disagreements with folks about Rodney King in particular, is that correct?
Yes.
Was that basically, did that boil down to white folks not getting it, or did that boil down to you having a better experience and maybe it took you a minute to get it?
It wasn't necessarily white folks. It was actually Black folks that also had very opinionated perspectives on it, and thinking that all police were bad and that there were, the system was corrupt and it could not and cannot serve the people, and that they were not going to listen to an officer because of their perspective.
Oh, I see. So they could only see law enforcement as an enemy.
Yes. They were the pre-defund the police people. They were people who did not believe in the system or didn't know how it operated or how it ran, or just simply saw it as all interactions with police are negative reactions.
Mm-hmm. That must have been awkward. I can imagine maybe you felt stuck in the middle of something.
Well, I mean, this was before I became a police officer. And as I became a police officer, I lost a number of friends because of what I chose to do. But I was okay with that because I knew I was going to find other people to fill that gap. But it's definitely one of those things that I try really hard to make a point to get to know somebody before I tell them what I do. So then it's not like, well, you're just a cop and you just think this way. And hopefully they question themselves on how they feel about cops after they met me.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Quick story. I did a ride along in Toledo, Ohio. I was part of this leadership program, and the police officer's name was Abraham. And what he was doing at the end of the evening really looked like social work to me. A young man had his parents had ordered a pizza. His friends were in a car at the end of the driveway, and they said to the pizza guy, "Yeah, we're supposed to get one of those pizzas and they're going to pay for it." So then the friends grabbed a pizza for free and drove away. So the parents called the police, and the police had a conversation with the young man about choosing your friends and making good decisions. And then the other was a domestic violence situation. And again, he was trying to make peace and tell the woman what resources were available to her. So it wasn't what I expected. It looked a lot like social work. So how young did you know that you wanted to be a police officer?
I just turned 21, and I was doing an internship with the Greensboro department, and that's when I made my decision on, let's find something that I can use my degree in. And so I started looking at nonprofits, and I realized without a master's degree, I wouldn't really be able to affect change. I looked at corrections, realized I didn't want to be locked up too all day. I looked at that. Hold on. Hey. I looked at federal jobs, realizing I didn't have the experience that they were looking for. So it boiled down to policing, and that was the right fit for me and the right shoe for me to try on for the time.
Okay, so you were pretty young. It's not child young, but very early young adulthood, I would say. You've accomplished a lot. You shared with me earlier that have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but you've accomplished a lot anyways. What are you most proud of?
I think the thing I'm most proud of is that despite having the disability, that I can openly talk about it. That is my biggest accomplishment as of yet, because when I first was experiencing symptoms of mental health disorder, I was fearful and ashamed, and I didn't know what to expect or what to do, despite the fact that my mother was a therapist. You know, I had to get over my humiliation of going to therapy because I thought, shoot, I can fix myself. I'm college educated. My mom's a therapist. You know, like, this is easy. There's really nothing wrong with me. I even went out of county to commit myself to a hospital, just for fear of what people would think of me. And that's been over 6 years ago that's happened. And now I'm just in a space where I'm comfortable with who I am and my disability, and I accept it as a part of who I am, and being able to talk about it with others. Hopefully it can help them in a way that I didn't have. I didn't have anybody else to look at to see how to go about doing this and getting to the place that I am. So I hope that maybe I can share with others, these are the steps you can take. This is a route that you can do, that you can feel good and honored by what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to take a second to thank you and really honor your courage for sharing your story tonight, but also for being kind of a trailblazer. Because there still aren't enough, I think, persons of color in law enforcement. There still aren't enough women in law enforcement, although it certainly seems to be changing for the better. And you know, your transparency just goes a long way towards sending a message to other people that you can do this too. You can be what you in your heart know you should be.
Yeah, I hope so. I hate to even call it a disability. The only reason why I do call it a disability is that you get protected by it when it comes down to like labor laws. My mental health is me, and my mental health happens to include a diagnosis of bipolar, and I've been living with her for a long time, and I'm proud of her, and we're getting better. We're just becoming the best version of ourselves as we move forward.
All right. Well, I think that's as good as it gets for a lot of us. So in 2013, moving into some tougher areas, you survived an attempt on your life when a young man pointed a gun at you and the gun jammed. What happened after that, if you don't mind telling us?
No problem. I responded to the call. I remember it happening and having a very strong physical response to what was happening at the time. But it wasn't until after the call was done and we were back at the substation talking amongst ourselves and talking with the suspect that I found out that the gun had jammed. And the second thing was that we had just gotten body-worn cameras, and it was I felt when that happened, afterwards I felt like I didn't respond appropriately. But it was amazing to go back and look at my body-worn camera and see that I did everything I was trained to do. I drew my gun. I got as small as I could. I crouched down, got cover. I did everything that I was supposed to. But that's when I fell apart. That's when I emotionally and physically started crying, is when I heard that the gun was jammed. And that was the only reason why I didn't get shot.
Yeah.
It was the catalyst that brought me to going to therapy. Mm-hmm. And it was the catalyst for me to get in touch with a psychiatrist. Had that not occurred, I don't know how long I would have been living with undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Because I had friends that were telling me, you know, you act a little manic right now. And I didn't really, I didn't see it. I couldn't. It was just me, how I always saw myself as just this person. I have my highs, I have lows, and I just thought that's what everybody else went through. I thought everybody else had racing thoughts through their heads. I thought that was normal. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back, this incident. And I remember the other thing that came from it was feeling so angry that a kid would put me in a position like that, where, you know, it made me realize the depth of my job and what it means to take the oath and realize I might have to pull the trigger.
That makes perfect sense to me. I can definitely understand having a delayed response, because when you're in crisis, you're just functioning on instinct, you're doing what you're trained to do. And then, you know, getting that additional information that it was just whatever, 1 in 1,000 chance that the gun jammed, and the weight of that, yeah, how close it was. Sure, that makes perfect sense to me. Do you feel like, I know some people I know would feel like, you know, I was saved for a reason, or do you ascribe any meaning to that gun jamming at that time? Do you see that as symbolic of anything?
I grew up being Episcopalian, went to Catholic school, had Jewish friends. I don't practice any religion now, but I do believe that there's something bigger than any of us. And I know on that day, I was wearing St. Michael, and that has always kept me safe.
The protector
of law enforcement. So every day that I put on that uniform, I make sure I wear St. Michael, and it is only but the grace of God go I. I mean, that's really, it is only through God's grace that I make it every day, or I wake up every day.
That's beautiful. And this is where I usually say, whatever faith or philosophy you choose to follow, if you choose to follow one, NAMI supports that. We don't pick a side, but, you know, if people follow their heart and find something good for their recovery, for their own spirit, we support that. I was just curious. So for those of us who don't know as much about law enforcement, what does fitness for duty mean? Because this is part of your story next.
Yeah, so fitness for duty. I wrote a few things down for that. So fitness for duty can be for one of two reasons. One, it's a medical reason. So you have diabetes, you're not treating your diabetes correctly, and you can go out for that reason. Number two, you have a mental health diagnosis and have crisis. And the third reason is that you're performing poorly and you can't figure out why. So you're not making it to work, you're making work late, you're not doing good productive work, there's errors in your work, things of that nature. So at this point in time, they involved either their med services, and you have to get medically cleared by a nurse practitioner, or two, you have to get cleared by what's called a psychiatric firm that the department hires, or there has to be some kind of resolution on why you're not performing at the level that you should be performing at, as far as showing up for work or writing reports in the manner that you should.
Okay.
Is that a good enough explanation for it?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a mandated leave, essentially, that can happen for those different reasons that you described.
Yes, it's mandated leave.
Okay. And so you've had that experience a few times, and it was related to your disability. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So when I first came to the department, being on a fit for duty was a death sentence. It was basically a job killer. If you got put on a fit for duty, you could probably guarantee that you next thing was going to be fired. So after many years of being with the department, the first time that I had a fit for duty, I had confided in a friend, a fellow coworker, that I was feeling suicidal. And based on the fact that I was feeling suicidal, they automatically put me on a fit for duty, and I was put on a light duty assignment, meaning that I wouldn't be responding to calls. I couldn't have my gun. I couldn't have my badge. And I had to go through an evaluation process with a psychiatrist to determine the extent of my mental capacity or mental state. And then a number of years later, I got put on a fit for duty after I had been a victim of a sexual assault and was having a hard time coping with it. And again, I was put on, had to see a psychiatrist to be evaluated to see where my state was at. And I was put out of work and put on light duty behind a desk, my gun and badge taken. And this last incident where my medication was altered sent me into an episode and made me feel suicidal. And again, the department made me go through the whole process of a fit for duty and extended it for 90 days for me to be evaluated for the second time to come back to work.
That's tough. That's tough. And you mentioned to me that you had asked for a Family Medical Leave Act. Is that correct? And that was tied in?
I was thinking that instead of having, I didn't have a choice in the matter, because my employers found out that I was suicidal. I had to do the fit for duty. But had I simply told my employers that I just need some time off, I could have done the FMLA, Family Leave Act, and gotten my meds and everything worked out without them knowing or having to be a part of that process.
Okay, but that didn't work out that way.
No.
Well, I don't want to sound redundant, but I again appreciate your courage. You're sharing some really difficult stuff. So many women experience sexual abuse, sexual assault, and I think the more we're willing to talk about that, I'm a survivor as well. The more we can be transparent about that kind of traumatic experience, the more we're erasing the shame and taking our power back. And I just think it's so important for women to do that. And having these mental health conversations and becoming a mental health advocate. That's how we change the narrative and reclaim our stories and reclaim our lives. So I really appreciate your doing that. What advice would you like to give law enforcement agencies about stigma and mental health?
That's a great question. I think every department needs to have policies in place, that we have clear guidelines and protocols in which to follow. But the main thing that also needs to take place is transparency on how we're going to treat this. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right to be in this system, in this process, and not know how long it's going to be or have input on how long it should be. Did I need 90 days? No. Did I probably need another 30 days? Probably. But the department is looking at me as an officer being a liability instead of me as an officer being a person. Because one of the things that I've read in numerous places when it comes to bipolar disorder is that routine is really important. Mm. And here you go and you systematically disassemble my life. I went from working 4 on, 4 off to working Monday through Friday, sitting at a desk, not around my peers, not doing what I do on a daily basis. You completely shattered that all, in addition to taking my gun and my badge. So I think it's, did I need to have my gun? Probably not. But in the sense of things, like, I needed to get back to my routine so I could get back to a better place faster instead of sitting out for 90 days. Mm-hmm. So I would just ask for as much transparency as possible when it comes to the process and how long you're going to be out and why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you would have benefited from more transparency, more communication from them. It also sounds like you didn't feel you had a voice. Do you think maybe it would have been helpful for you to have an advocate or some change in the process?
I think it's always good to have an advocate. We have a peer support team. Maybe they should be a part of the process.
That would make sense.
I tried to advocate for myself as much as I could in the state that I was, but it feels like you're almost arguing with them and they don't want to listen to you because they're putting more weight on what the psychiatrist has to say instead of saying, maybe it should be 60-40, 60% for the officer, 40% for the psychiatrist, who gets to have what say in this matter. Maybe, I don't know. But it was frustrating to everything that I try to have a conversation with is like, you try to stand up for yourself and you try to be an advocate for yourself and you try to explain to people what you're doing is not helping me. It's hurting me. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for them to see that and to acknowledge it.
Sure. Yeah, and it is a balancing act that they need to do to make sure that they're honoring your needs and following their policies. And it would be a tough situation, I think, for the commanding officer as well. I'm not sure I'm using the right language there, but
you are.
Okay. What does the public need to know about police and mental health?
We are human. Stop thinking what you see on TV is real. It's not. We are human. We have the same faults as the average person out here. And thinking that we can solve your problems more than we can solve our own problems is unrealistic. And that it's really important to be patient with us. there was something that I wrote down that I wanted to really say. That I wanted to say that we make mistakes and we lose our patience, just like the average person. But be kind and true. Do try to understand where we're coming from. There's some stuff that just simply gets lost in translation between civilians and officers, or civilians and soldiers. But make an effort to actually go up and speak to an officer. Get to know them as a person instead of this person being just this uniform and a badge, because there is a person in that uniform, and they come to this job with all of those different problems, just like every other person in the world does. And so just take the time to get to know us and have a conversation. You might find out you have more in common with us than you realize.
That's a great point. And just as folks with mental health conditions don't want to be painted with one broad brush, I'm sure neither do law enforcement officers. It's, people are people, and it's so important to give each person the benefit of the doubt and see them and honor them as an individual, at least give people a chance.
Yes.
All right. Some comments that we're getting in the chat box. Jacqueline Lewis says, thank you for sharing your courage, your strengths, and your honesty. And a comment from Molly Redden about police officer suicide. I wonder if it would end or help curtail police suicide if their access to guns was curtailed or limited when they're off duty in particular. Any thoughts about that?
I am the oddball when it comes to guns. I'm not like an enthusiast. I don't own a second gun, but I would say the vast majority of most officers own a second gun and have access to other weapons. So you could collect their guns at the end of their shift, but then there's the issue of if they are going to be working off duty or have other assignments where they need to have their guns. It starts getting really complicated if you were going to take away an officer's gun after their duty day. It would change our culture altogether. I understand what you're trying to get at, but I just don't see it working that way. At the time that I had my last incident, there was a fellow officer that ended up committing suicide. And I just think, what if I had just had a conversation with him about how I was feeling? Could that have made a difference? Because there's lots of ways to kill yourself outside of a gun.
Wow. Right. I love that insight. What if I would have shared my problems with someone and opened up, made myself a little bit vulnerable?
Yeah.
We tend to think we don't want to be a burden or we feel ashamed, but it is really helping the person that you choose to share with. It's giving them a big gift. Yeah, the gift of trust and permission to share what they're going through. So, what gives you hope?
People give me hope. They can be my nemesis sometimes, but people give me hope because I always see that people are capable of change. When it comes down to it, a person can overcome their odds and be good and do kind things for individuals. So it's people that gives me hope.
Okay. All right. Well, that was my last interview question. Is there anything you'd like to add before we move towards our video of the week?
Just want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for tuning in, listening to us, having this conversation. It's really important that we have people that are invested in the police for whatever reason. And it's important to challenge the way we have done things and learn to do things differently in the future.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I support that. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up the interview portion of the show. Before we move on to our video of the week, I always want to give my shout out to those working behind the scenes. We have fabulous helpers, including our App State social work intern, Caitlin Rita, and NAMI North Carolina Executive Director, Gary Kreitz. Of course, now I'll give a shout out to peer-to-peer leader, Brooke Chambers of NAMI Wake County. She was teaching a class, and that's where she met Sadie, and she connected Sadie to this program and to me. So that's why we're able to hear this wonderful story and have this insight from Sadie tonight. And of course, thank you, Sadie, for being our guest and spending your evening with us.
Thank you.
All right. So for our video of the week, we're going to move on to something just a little light. Usually our video is something a little more lighthearted and fun. This is Roxy, the former mascot of NAMI, North Carolina. Bless her little heart, Roxy Morrison, our little beagle. She's still with us in spirit, and for that, we're grateful. All righty, now we are ready to take questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience on Facebook and Zoom, and we'll be thrilled to hear from you. We've got a couple questions lined up right now. Let's see, another question. What are some of your insights about police brutality in this country, and how can we end it?
Police brutality is present. I'm not saying it isn't. It does not happen to the extent in which people think it does. Unfortunately, you get a snippet of what one incident is going on, and you don't have the pretext clues to let you know what led up to the event. So it makes it look more horrific than what it is. Mm-hmm. In the cases where it's senseless acts that officers are doing, I have no respect for an officer that abuses their authority and cannot keep their emotions in check when it comes to dealing with people that are different or are having a hard time on drugs or whatever else. It's your responsibility as an officer to come to work with the right mental attitude in order to deal with whatever comes your way. But I would say it's not to the degree that most people think it is, and that that most officers that I've dealt with in my career have definitely been within the guidelines of what they could do as a use of force towards someone.
Mm-hmm. As you were talking, it occurred to me how easy it is to see only darkness and evil in the world if you just read the headlines and allow yourself to be drawn in by all those very difficult, the things that are on the news. They say if it bleeds, it leads. And I think with people having cell phones, they capture those worst moments, and those are the moments that go viral. I do see occasionally on social media a video of a police officer who just stops in a neighborhood and plays basketball with people, or you saw someone walking to work 5 miles each way every day and started a GoFundMe to get the person a bicycle or a car. There's a lot of good happening. And if you look around your own community too, a lot of the people who are joining us tonight are the ones implementing good in their community. But that doesn't always make the news.
I guess just to answer the only way we can stop the brutality is making sure that we are holding ourselves accountable and by education. And so when we talk about defunding the police, that is not the way or the direction we need to go. Police are getting called to more and more things that are not police related, like mental health calls, checked welfare calls, calls about panhandlers on the side of the street. Those are not real police issues. And we need to have better training to deal with individuals that we don't understand.
Mm-hmm. I know in some communities, they have programs where a police officer and a social worker are paired to go out on some of those calls. What are your thoughts about that?
I wish we had, our department has a similar program, and I wish we had it, that it covered weekends and evenings, and we had a whole nother squad for it, because the need is there. They run calls all day long without stopping because the need is there, because we have people who have challenging situations. You know, sometimes our domestic violence calls are not just domestic violence, they're also about the fact that this woman or man doesn't have the ability to move out of the situation. Right. They would leave if they could go somewhere, but they can't because they don't have the funds or the means. And so it becomes much more like, how am I supposed to help this person get out of this domestic situation when I don't even, you know, and it's even worse when it comes to mental health. Like, we know this person is mentally challenged or has a mental illness, but there is nothing we can do if they don't say that they're going to harm themselves or others. We show up, we tell them, don't go out of your apartment naked again, and that's it. That's all.
And just to clarify, in North Carolina and every other state, there is a law that says you can't bring someone to a psychiatric hospital involuntarily without their permission unless they are a clear threat to themselves or others. In other words, suicidal or homicidal. So your hands are tied if the person says they don't want help and they are not a threat to themselves or others. You cannot force treatment on an adult in this country. So it is frustrating to family members and loved ones sometimes. Even the person themselves might look back with deep regret and see that they had chased away people who are trying to help them. It's very sticky and it's hard to know what to do. Question from Linda: how does the peer support group that you mentioned work in the police department? Does it include current and or retired law enforcement officers?
How does it work? So it typically is current officers. They do receive training. It works as a informal interview, not even interview, it's an informal exchange. So for instance, I think there's probably 20 or 30 officers that are on the peer support team, and they will know about incidents that occur that in the department. And within those 20 to 30 officers, they kind of cover, like, somebody's bound to know somebody on that list. So they know that, hey, I can call Officer Smith and follow up, make sure that they're doing all right. They don't need anything else. I know they went on a really bad child abuse call. They can kind of do those things. They also can set up meetings, debriefings for officers that have gone through traumatic events. They also will get called out for barricaded subjects or shooting calls that are gruesome, and just be on standby for anybody that want to talk to them. So those are a couple different ways that they're used in our department.
That sounds like a fabulous program.
Yeah, I actually know a handful of officers that are on that program, and I've reached out to them for myself and for others.
Nice. Comment from Gary in the chat box, a shout out also to CIT trained officers, and that stands for Crisis Intervention Team, who do amazing things in tough situations. If you're not familiar with CIT, you probably are, Sadie, but for the general public, CIT trained officers undergo 40 hours of continuous training and lots of follow-up support, and they learn how to manage situations in which mental health is a factor. So they learn to de-escalate that situation. The traditional police training is sort of command and control, get compliance. Lack of compliance is, not met with any kind of gentleness or sensitivity. When mental illness is a factor, there are ways to de-escalate and avoid the violence. So they're trained in that area. And NAMI historically has been very involved, and we are in North Carolina. One of our attendees tonight, Madonna Greer, has done some fantastic work with CIT, and a lot of other folks have too. So we're very grateful for all of that. And the next question relates to CIT. Have you participated in that, and do you have any comments about it?
Yes, I have participated in CIT training. I think it's very useful. It's probably should be an 80-hour class. There's so much to go over and so much to learn that if it wasn't 40 hours and we could have 80 hours, or if we could have 40 hours every year on CIT, I think that we would be in a really good place, because things are ever evolving and changing, and what we know about the human brain and chemistry is so vast. So things are changing and evolving within this field, and we have to keep up with it. It's something that I think every agency, every officer should go through the training. It gives you a good generalization of what to expect and to identify what we can in the field. It does not make us experts. It just makes us a little bit more qualified, a little bit more patient, a little bit more understanding about what we have to do every day.
Mm-hmm. Right. I can understand that. 40 hours does seem, it's a pretty limited time period. There's just so much to learn. And the next question, if this is not too intrusive, could you let us know if you are back to full duty? Thank you.
I am back to full duty, and I am so grateful for it. It's amazing. I think I've taken for granted most of my life that I've been able to do a job that I wanted to do instead of a job that I've had to do just to pay the bills. I love what I do. I love the challenge that my job presents me. And it feels good to even be cussed out sometimes, but it feels good to be at full working potential and be it just, I feel like I'm completely engaged back in my life now.
That is fabulous. That's one of the best statements I've heard all week. Good for you. Congratulations. Yeah, that's wonderful. Keep the questions coming, folks, on Facebook and Zoom. We have a lull right now, so I'll make a couple quick announcements. Please come back next week. We've got Sierra Cobb with the nonprofit Emancipate NC. She will be talking about how to build skills after incarceration. So kind of coming at another criminal justice conversation from a totally different angle. If you've been incarcerated, when you get back home, you get back to the community, how do you learn to live independently? There are a lot of special challenges, and maybe you never had the opportunity to master those skills. So she'll be talking about that. She is a family advocate with Emancipate NC next week at 7 o'clock. Please come back and join us. If you're on Zoom with us and when you leave the show, please fill out the survey that will magically appear on your screen. Let us know how we can improve. Let us know what you like. That will help us improve over time, and we'll be so grateful. Forever in your debts. Any other questions? You've got just a couple of minutes to get them out there. And Sadie, is there anything that you'd like to add while we have a slow minute here?
I can't think of anything. You guys have been great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. If you meet a young officer and they're struggling with mental health, or maybe just trying to get used to the traumatic parts of doing the job, what support do you give them? What do you say to them?
You know, the most important thing I think is just to listen. You know, I can't tell you, so many people just need somebody to listen to them. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a priest. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just an officer, but listening is the first and most important thing that you can do, and then provide resources. Okay. So if you talking to me isn't enough, then you might need to think about getting a therapist or a psychiatrist or joining a peer support group or something else. But, you know, I try to make sure that the first thing I do is listen and not judge. And the second thing is to list the resources that are available to them so that they know that they're not alone in this.
Right, absolutely. Compelling comment from Gary in the chat box. There is no such thing as just an officer. You and your brothers and sisters are phenomenal.
Thanks.
He has a way with words, doesn't he? I like that. All right. Well, it seems like we're winding up the show. We kind of go with the energy of the show, and usually wind up by 8, sometimes go longer if it seems like people keep wanting to chat with us. But I want to thank you again, Sadie McDonald, for your time and your courage. I love your authenticity. You're not dressing things up or down. You're just, you know, this is who I am, and it's sort of quietly inspiring. So thank you. And everyone else, please come back and join us. If you're out there feeling alone, misunderstood, not sure of your place in the world, please give us a call at NAMI North Carolina, or talk to someone who understands. You know, we've been there, we've been down that road, and we'd love to hear your story. So thanks everyone, and have a wonderful night. All right. Bye.
Bye.